I'll call the Newport Beach City Council meeting to order for July 8th, 2008. Do we have a closed session report from the City Attorney?
Yes, there's nothing to report from closed session.
Okay, can we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that Councilmember Webb is absent, and it's an excused absence.
Okay, would you please join me and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Councilwoman Gardner, followed by the invocation by Pastor Eric Hurd of Mariners Church.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. God, we are so grateful for our city. We are thankful for its people. We thank you for those who serve this great city. We are thankful for our police department that protects us. We thank you for our fire department, and we thank you for this council. And tonight, God, we pray that you would grant them wisdom in their decision-making, listening ears, and a keen heart to know what's best for this city, even in the smallest of decisions. And we recognize that you place them as leaders in this city, and we are thankful for each of them and for their families and the service that they bring to this city. And so watch over this council meeting, and we're thankful for your presence, and we're thankful for our great city. Amen.
Okay, we have no presentations this evening, so we'll go to our next item on the agenda. Madam Clerk.
Notice to the public. The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the council. Speakers must limit comments to 5 minutes on agenda items. The council has the discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items. As a courtesy, please turn phones and pagers off or set them in the silent mode. Now is the time for City Council announcements or matters which council members would like placed on a future agenda for discussion, action, or report.
Okay, Councilman Henn.
I have nothing.
Councilman Rosansky.
Nothing, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Dager.
Yes, East Bluff Drive is in the process of being repaved, and the city takes great pride in the conditions of its roadways, and more than 20% of our land area is pavement, and so we not only are looking at we're looking at the aesthetic condition of the road and also the nearby areas. As a matter of fact, in this year's budget, we approved a lot of beautification for medians as well as the shoulder of the road. Our roads are among the city's assets, and I'd like to share with you the city's strategic efforts to keep the roads up. Specifically, the city has a pavement management plan that is continually updated and used by staff to estimate and plan major pavement projects based on a pavement condition index. Our citywide paving index is one of the highest in Orange County. On a scale of 100, the condition of the pavement on average in Newport Beach received a score of 84. By way of comparison, Laguna Beach was 77, Costa Mesa was 75, Fountain Valley was 70, Huntington Beach was 63, and Irvine was 86. In layperson's terms, our street pavement overall is in very good condition and generally in better shape than most Orange County cities. How do we do that? Different ways. First, the city paving projects range from minor street slurry seals to asphalt, pavement overlays to complete pavement removal and replacement. Funding for pavement rehabilitation comes from a number of sources, including state gas tax, county Measure M, special bonding such as Prop 1B, and grants, as well as the city's general fund. Annual expenditures vary year from year. This coming year, the council recently approved over $6.6 million in planned street and alley pavement projects. East Bluff Drive was approved last year, and what we have on the books this year is Birch Street, Dove Street, Violito, areas of Corona del Mar, south of Coast Highway, and Kings Road. And this year's slurry seal project will primarily be in the Bay Knoll and Mariners community. And in our ongoing effort to keep the public informed, our Public Works Department will be posting our pavement management plan online. So all of our residents will be able to see what our plan is for this year and our tentative plans coming up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Gardner.
None.
Councilman Curry.
The city of Newport Beach has many 4th of July traditions, and I was privileged to participate in 3 of them this last weekend. The first was the Mariners Neighborhood Bicycle Parade, which has literally hundreds of kids that come out from the side streets to go to Mariners Park for a great festival sponsored by the parents and the school, and it was a terrific event, as it is every year. The next event was the American Legion Boat Parade, this year with Dan Marciano as the Grand Marshal, and it was a great day to be on the bay and enjoy Newport Beach. And finally, the 50th anniversary fireworks show at the Dunes, which really put on the display of the very best in the community. One other additional announcement is that on Sunday, July 13th, will be the 32nd anniversary of Liberty Baptist Church, and they've invited the community to their services beginning at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Curry. I don't have any. We have an item scheduled for 7:10, which we're going to take out of order on the agenda. It's item number 13. And it is a summary of the proposed settlement terms between Sober Living by the Sea and the City of Newport Beach regarding group residential uses. And, well, we get into the consent calendar. It's actually 7:09 by my clock here. So by the time I get done going through the introduction here, we won't be getting into the discussion, I don't think. Just a few introductory comments on it. That one of the things we're doing tonight is anybody that wants to comment on any of the group home issues that they would normally comment under public comments, that under item 13 would be the time to do that. Staff is going to keep track of all the questions tonight that are raised by the public, and we'll answer them as a group after public comment is over. And the order of things will then be the staff presentation, public comments, and then the questions and answers. And I think we'll wait here about 30 seconds until 7:10 before Dave begins doing his presentation. Pardon me?
Not to be too technical, but I'd prefer to use the council chamber clock. It's a little bit slower, I guess, than your cell phone, but I won't want someone to walk in a minute.
Okay.
Dave, do you have any
Early.
humorous anecdotes that you can share with us until
Can't we?
I certainly wish I did.
Can't we just do the consent calendar stuff and?
Okay, let's
Why don't we
go to
move on to
consent
that
calendar. Does anyone have anything to pull off the consent calendar?
Not I.
Nope.
Councilman Curry, Councilman Henn,
Nothing, thank you.
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Daigle, I have nothing. Staff?
Nothing.
Okay. Anybody from the audience want to pull anything from the consent calendar?
Yes, I'd like to pull item 7.
Okay. Any other items to be pulled? Okay. Bring it back to council. Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll try to say this very slowly. Make a motion to approve items 1 to 11 and pull number 7, please.
Second.
Okay, please vote.
Motion carries.
Okay, Laura, want to raise your question on item 7?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is Laura Curran. I live in Newport Beach. On item 7, this is regarding the hiring of Wes Morgan as a consultant at the cost of $75 per hour. My question is, what is the financial impact of hiring Mr. Morgan under these terms to the PB&R budget, considering we're also hiring a director? Will it create an overage or an underage? Is there a potential cost in terms of retirement? The impact could be positive or negative, and I know that F20 does not specify that analysis is required, but given the city's trying to put a lot more focus on its budget process and fiscal responsibility, it would be good financial planning to give a comprehensive financial analysis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Blutow?
Mr. Mayor, a comprehensive financial analysis at this point is really difficult. How much time Wes Morgan is going to spend over the next 6 months under the terms and conditions of this contract is really difficult to determine at this point. It has no effect whatsoever on his retirement or the money that the city pays into retirement. He will retire before the end of this month, and this contract would not basically feed into any retirement considerations in terms of PERS.
And I might add, at least for financial considerations, is that the amount of money would be limited to not more than 960 hours, because that's all that a retiree can work under PERS. So it would affect his retirement if he was to work more than 960. So I think the outside expense of that contract would be the $75 that's being asked to be approved for per hour times 960.
And like the staff report says, we envision, both Mr. Morgan and myself envision, that the 12 hours a week is not going to be reached under normal circumstances. So since the contract runs 6 months, half of the fiscal year, at the end of that time we will assess the cost and whether that could be absorbed by the department, and if not, then come back for a budget amendment.
Okay.
Homer, in your reasonable judgment, though, are you concerned about exceeding the budget in Parks and Rec as a result of this understanding?
No, I am not.
Okay, anybody else want to comment on this item? Okay, is there a second? Okay, please vote.
Motion carries.
Okay, now we'll go back to item number 13. Mr. Kiff, you want to start your presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'd note, too, for the council and audience's reference that Jim Markman is with us, special counsel on this issue. Jim is with Richard Watson's Gershon. And thank you, Councilmember Henn. So I have about a 10-minute presentation I want to go through with you. Here's what we'll talk about. Action since the city's group residential use ordinance was adopted. That was in January of 2008. And we'll look at both the administrative actions and the legal actions. And then I'll go through the settlement proposed with Sober Living by the Sea, acronym listed up there, some of the key concepts, and then we'll look at how it affects a couple of neighborhoods specifically. Then we'll talk about what's next, and then where folks can find out more information. So here are some of the actions since January of 2008. Again, as a reminder, the ordinance itself took effect 30 days after your council considered it, so that was effectively February 20th, 2008. And then we've gone through administrative actions since then. Operators had roughly 90 days. We set that at May 22nd, 2008, to apply for use permits. Those that did comprised about 41 addresses and about 401 beds. And those include Sober Living by the Sea, Yellowstone Recovery, Narconon, Southern California, Ocean Recovery, Newport Coast Recovery, Kramer Center, and Balboa Horizons Recovery. So these are the only operators that applied for use permits. Those that did not apply include about 18 buildings with about 220 beds. These include Pacific Shores Recovery, 3 buildings, 60 beds, Morningside Recovery, a large operator, 5 to 6 different buildings, 60 to 72 beds. The Shores Treatment, that actually closed. Lynn House, that's in West Santa Ana Heights, and about 7 to 8 other small independent facilities with up to about 79 beds. And the day after May 22nd, on May 23rd, we sent notices of abatement to each of these operators and the independent facilities per what the ordinance asked us to do. I'm going to talk next about the legal actions. Pacific Shores Recovery and Sober Living by the Sea filed suit under federal and state fair housing laws to block the ordinance from taking effect and to claim damages. Pacific Shores Recovery and Sober Living filed federal housing discrimination complaints against the city's actions with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Concerned citizens of Newport Beach sued the city for $250 million and sued operators as well. The city filed a cross-complaint against the operators and concerned citizens to consolidate the lawsuits in U.S. District Court. Sober Living by the Sea filed a motion to enjoin the city from enforcing that ordinance, and in roughly mid-May, Judge Selna with the U.S. District Court blocked only the portion of the ordinance having to deal with state alcohol and drug program license. You'll see that ADP marker up there, but that stands for Alcohol and Drug Programs, a State Department. that ADP licensed 6 and unders operating integrally with each other, that we could not require use permits of those as our ordinance envisioned. The rest of the ordinances affecting, well, roughly about 80% of the ordinance was allowed to go ahead. Continuing with legal actions, the city asked Sober Living by the Sea and Concerned Citizens to enter into mediation. That mediation was held June 5th and 6th, so earlier last month. Sober Living by the Sea and the city met for 2 days and developed a term sheet. This term sheet is to become a development agreement, and that development agreement is subject to hearings before the Planning Commission once and before your council twice. And then the City Concerned Citizens negotiations continue. I'm going to talk next about the proposed settlement. The first part of the settlement is caps on beds, citywide caps and caps in the area that I'm going to refer to as the Peninsula, West Newport, and Lido Isle. It also includes Newport Shores. The overall bed cap for Sober Living by the Sea's operations citywide would be this. They would initially go to 156 beds, and that's down from my estimate of 238 beds in mid-07, and down from 204 beds submitted by Sober Living within the use permit process. Now, they can go back up to a permanent cap of 204, but those additional 48 beds, so the difference between 156 and 204, must go in multifamily residential per what our ordinance directs, and entirely off of that same area, that impacted area as some folks call it, the Peninsula, West Newport, Newport Shores, and Lido. And the additional 48 beds are subject to a one building per block dispersion. I'll talk about that more in a second. And that Sober Living can only add those additional 148 beds when and if they have completed a one building per block dispersion. Now, importantly, the limits and caps apply to all beds, whether they're ADP licensed facilities, including 6 and unders. I'm going to bring that home a couple of times because state law doesn't authorize cities to do this, yet this term sheet does allow us to do it with Sober Living. And it also applies to all unlicensed Sober Living by the Sea facilities. Within that bed cap are 2 subcaps. In the Peninsula, West Newport, and Newport Shores, the permanent subcap is 144 beds. That's a 35% reduction from my estimates. There's a Lido Isle permanent subcap of 12 beds. That's a 33% reduction from my estimates. Here's a diagram of how that works, basically. 144 beds in this stretch of the peninsula, including Newport Shores, West Newport, about roughly 15 buildings, 12 beds. These are all in one building on Lido. It's right on Via Antibes and Via Lida Sud at the corner. The other 48 beds have to go all in MFR and in the rest of the community, if they're able to do that at all after accomplishing one building per block dispersion. Let's talk about that dispersion. Sober Living agreed to move their property leases upon expiration to this one building per block concept. There is an exception for a long-time Sober Living property. That's at 112 40th Street, and that's very close to 3960, 3980 Seashore. And on blocks in which there are currently more than one building per block, they have to relocate. And they have to relocate to an address where there would be one building per block and none across a bordering street after a move. There are 3 exceptions to this. Again, these are long-time Sober Living properties at 45th Street, on Seashore, and on Ocean. Those are identified there. And as a result, up to about 10 separate units with about 50 beds will have to move. The term sheet discusses one facility at 4816 having to close because that was opened without first obtaining a use permit. And then I'm noting that a duplex with clients in each unit counts as one building. Sober Living's model is to have 6 beds in one unit and 4 in the adjoining unit for a count of 10 within that building. Continuing on dispersion, including distances, Sober Living agreed that they will not be located any closer than 1,000 feet from elementary schools and known licensed daycare facilities as of the date of this agreement, and they won't have any facilities on any street immediately adjacent to certain tot lots. Going next to operational improvements, they agreed not to accept any parolees, and they agreed to abide by the operating standards within the ordinance, including trash enclosures, management of secondhand smoke, parking standards, route plans for transport of staff and clients, limiting business deliveries, maintaining a curfew, and then disposing of medical waste. They agreed to establish and maintain a 24-hour hotline for residents' inquiries and concerns, and agreed to participate with the city in a larger stakeholders group to address neighborhood complaints and concerns on a going forward basis. And then concluding here, the other things they agreed to do was to dismiss the Housing and Urban Development complaint, send a letter to HUD so stating that, and then upon approval of the development agreement outlining these terms, they dismissed their lawsuit against the ordinance. So what's important here? Certainly very important to get control over ADP license 6 and unders. Again, state law doesn't grant us this ability. This development agreement would grant us that ability. Our ordinance doesn't grant us that ability. Noting that our integral facilities language was blocked by the district court, settlement results in the same control that the ordinance would have allowed, at least with Sober Living by the Sea. Then it's important to note that the ordinance can go forward. This is the root of our regulatory process for group residential uses, and the most significant legal challenge against it would end. We talked about the one building per block standard. Remember, the ordinance allowed a hearing officer to consider placement of, just consider and not actually require, placement of 1 or 2 per block. The distancing from elementary schools and licensed daycare, the ordinance could not oppose any distance from these uses. No parolees, that was something beyond what the ordinance authorized. And then mirroring those operational standards is important too, plus the 2 things that I just mentioned, the hotline and the stakeholders group. So let's look at how this affects certain neighborhoods, and bear with me on here. This is actually up on our website for folks at home if they want to look at this. This is 45th Street. You can see where 2 facilities, this one and this one, are directed within the ordinance to relocate or close. 2 can stay, this one here and this one here. So basically you're going to, in mid-2007, 44 beds down to 24 beds. And the places that they could go nearby, you can see they can't go here, they can't go here, can't go here. There's another facility over here, can't go here. They could go into these yellowish areas, just a handful, just to show how that works. And they could only relocate there with that concept of 1 building per block dispersion. Let's look at 39th Street next. This, as folks know, has been a significantly impacted street, which thanks to neighborhood efforts, the residents' efforts, and your council and the city, I think we've made some significant changes there. These 2 homes, this one here, this 10-bed one, this 10-bed, would have to relocate or close. This one here is already closed. This was a very successful code enforcement action for us. This one here is subject to abatement. These 2 could stay under the settlement agreement. These are not all Sober Living's homes. This was not, this was not, this is. But you could see how this will change the character of the 39th Street area from 69 beds in mid-2007 to 20 beds with this agreement. This next chart discusses kind of where I mentioned who applied for things and who didn't. This is a list of the bed count by operator and operators on this side. You can see that in mid-2007, we believe we were about at 679 beds. With the proposed settlement, we believe we'll be down to 371 beds for the initial period, with the possibility of going up to 419 under the permanent cap. Now, this assumes a couple things. It assumes we successfully abate all the operators that didn't apply for use permits, and it assumes that, which I think is quite an assumption, that those that did apply for use permits get all the beds that they've asked for. So I try to be cautious in preparing those numbers. So what's next? The development agreement is being drafted by Jim. It'll be followed by a review by the city attorney and the city council, actually the subcommittee that works on this issue with us. It'll be heard before the planning commission in a public setting. Then it'll be heard before the city council, a full city council, twice in a public setting and adopted as an ordinance. And then at the same time, we're going through the use permit hearings for the other operators. We've finished our reviews for completeness of the applications. We responded back to the applicants that didn't have enough information, and actually none did. Those hearings would be pending in 60 to 90 days. We're working closely with the planning department to follow the same procedures we follow for any use permit. Abatement proceedings continue for those that chose not to apply. They have until February 2009 or the end of the lease, whichever is sooner. So we're in the process of gathering up as much lease information as we can. And then, as noted, we sent out abatement letters representing about 220 beds in May. For more information, and I'll wrap up with this, Mr. Mayor, there's information, all of this information regarding the settlement, the use permits, and our media contacts are on the website under group residential uses. And please, for anyone who's interested in participating in those use permit hearings and the hearings relating to the development agreement, don't hesitate to pick up the phone there at that number or send me an email, and I'll put you on the interested parties list. So that concludes my presentation.
Okay, are there any?
One small correction. I think one of the slides indicated that the city had cross-claimed against the concerned citizen, and that is not the case. The city does not have a cross-claim or a cross-complaint against concerned citizens. It is in the same case, but it was directed only at the operators who were defendants in that case. So the city has not affirmatively brought suit against concerned citizens in any way.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Markham. Okay, any questions from the council on Mr. Kiff? Okay, can we get the lights, please? Okay, I'll open this up for public comments. Again, this is the time to address Mr. Kiff's report or any group residential issue. So anyone wishing to address the council, please step forward. And remember, the staff will be writing down any questions that you might be asking.
Okay. Ed Vandenbosch, West Newport. I don't have much of a comment. It's more a question. I don't understand how you can have an ordinance and then, by agreement, limit the application of the ordinance to somebody. It's like I could make a deal with the city to go 50 on Balboa Boulevard or something if the limit's 30. So somebody could explain that so that I understand that whether or not we're allowing somebody to not comply with the law.
Okay, thank you.
Dick Nichols, Corona Del Mar. I have some comments on the development agreement, use of it. First, this can be legally transferred from one party to another, so Sober Living by the Sea could transfer their entire interest to another company and continue it. And all the homes that are set now are not set in stone. They can be transferred around in the neighborhoods. So that's interesting too. Allows units to be transferred from one facility to another. Consequently, any home in any area could have an ADP facility beside it in the future. This will depress real estate values throughout the neighborhood, maybe even the city. 3, the city has agreed to a 1 building per block dispersion. The city agreed to a duplex with clients in each unit counts as only 1 building. So basically they've agreed, and so did the the other people that that's an integral home. This was disallowed in residential, and we're now saying it's not only allowed, but if you only have half of that duplex, you could put the rest of it in. This seems to be an admission that all separate 6 and under halves are really integral units and not allowed in residential by the ordinance. This development agreement is much more expansive and foreboding than the same requiring a general plan amendment and vote of the people. We believe this deserves similar consideration. I would note that the Fashion Island expansion is much less than this is in how it affects the people. And we required a vote of the people to have that done as a general plan amendment. Finally, this agreement with Sober Living by the Sea sets precedent for similar agreements with the other ADPs. Are you contemplating this? Are you planning to set up a fund to bridge property value loss due to ADP homes moving around? And finally, are you planning to test the federal integral home exclusion in court? Your capitulation here is massive. Instead of zoning applying, you abandon the whole concept. And I think that was the basis of most of your development, I mean your agreement in the first place. So it seems like people need to understand this, and there's a lot of things here to contemplate that are unusual. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, we're Steve and Karen Turansky from West Newport. We've been dealing with an overwhelming and unsanitary amounts of trash.
I think you're up under the wrong agenda item. I think you want to come up under public comments.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We'll be back.
No problem. Okay, anyone else want to address the council on the group home report?
Daniel Weldon, resident of Newport Beach. Good evening. One, there is some information on your website that states my name from CCNV, and I think if you're going to state stuff on the website, I think you should state everything in its entirety, not just pull out blurbs and use it for the city's benefit. Also, your counts up here, I don't think I was deaf when I heard the council for Sober Living by the Sea, and let's call it their introduction of mediation, say they needed 162 beds. And here we're giving them 204 beds. So we didn't even in business negotiations negotiate that 162 was the high number, and let's try to bring it down from there. We gave them more. I don't know where you went to, Economics 101, but that's not my business sense. The deal, everybody's got to understand in this city all the facts of this. These people, will they be avoiding the fire codes that are set up already in this city? What will they be avoiding? The city says on its website this saves them a lot of money. They're doing this whole deal for free. Might as well discuss all the other things. An offer was made, Sober Living by the Sea. Might show up that they're going to contribute to a park here in the city, so they look good to the city residents. Everybody needs to learn all the facts, and if you're going to post it on your website, give them all the facts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Denise Oberman, resident of Newport, representative for Concerned Citizens. Follow up to what Dan said, there is posting on the website that is misleading with regard to Concerned Citizens' position relative to group homes in the city's proposed settlement. We are not at all confident that this proposed settlement results in a deconcentration, particularly in the impacted coastal area. In fact, as Mr. Weldon said, Soberly by the Sea has repeatedly represented since summer of '07 that their current business level is somewhere in the 155 to 162 bed range, and all of those beds do in fact sit and will continue to sit within the over-concentrated impacted coastal area. The standard in the agreement of one block dispersion is a standard which we can accept. It allows continued over-concentration in potentially many other areas in addition to the impacted one. There could be one facility every 250 to 300 feet. That would give us even more facilities than we have now. The exception, as Mr. Weldon also says, does need to be clearly presented and clearly understood, because there are actually a major portion of Sober Living by the Sea's beds that are in fact managed by exception and do continue to saturate particular neighborhoods. A proposed development agreement will in fact create a long-term and fundamental, potentially irrevocable change in the land use plan and program for this area of the city. This entitlement, if approved, is counter to the current general plan and relevant specific plans. It can, again, on a long-term basis, change the fundamental character of approved physical and planned physical development characteristics, as well as the social and economic character of our residential community. And then lastly, relative to the distancing from elementary schools and licensed daycare and other specification for, quote, certain tot lots, concerned citizens found nothing, nor did the city in its research, that would say that such a standard could not be applied and defended to all schools, to parks, and even to bars, which can be substantiated in case law. More to follow in the upcoming public hearings, and we well expect that our city provides full transparency and disclosure throughout this process so the public can make an accurate evaluation and have its due process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this subject?
Good evening. My name is Laura Curran. I live in Newport. I want to comment on two items. First, not all blocks are created equal. So in some R2 and R1 neighborhoods, a block has 2 houses, and some it has 10. So this definition is rather vague. And the city recognized the same when it updated the reforestation ordinance in 2002 to 2003. The original language proposed for getting signatures from your neighbors said you had to get it from people on your block. But it was pointed out that some houses have one block, some blocks have 1 house, and some have 40. So that was an undue hardship. And the language now requires 500 feet from your house. So the city should look at the block and define a block disbursement 1,000 feet or a block, whichever is greater. Secondly, related to the integral facilities definition, the city's FAQ and public relations material states that Attorney Markman believes the May 2008 preliminary injunction regarding integral facilities would apply to other operators, and the integral facilities definition cannot be applied. I'd like to know what is the basis of that claim. So I'm not an attorney, so I have limited exposure to civil law, but my basic research says that, for example, in the same way that one person's divorce and the terms of their divorce or prenup do not apply to another's, one operator's settlement is not another operator's settlement. If the Sober Living by the Sea city federal lawsuit is dismissed to the development agreement, because of the development agreement, then in theory the preliminary injunction may go away because the case is settled. Thus, it would remain part of the ordinance since the case was settled and didn't go to trial. We don't know that definitively without seeing the proposed settlement and development agreement. So we went through all the effort to develop an ordinance. I know Dave Kiff spent many hours of his life on it, and we put a lot of effort into it as residents as well. And so I'd like to see the city, if we went through that effort to develop an ordinance and an important integral facilities definition, then make a good faith effort to apply it. We don't know what another judge's final ruling would be without actually going through the process of applying the ordinance to 2 licensed 6 and unders, which meet the definition of integral facilities. And finally, I'd ask you to please update the chart for bed counts online. I know it's a moving target, but for example, in Corona Del Mar, Miramar Health received 2 licenses for 6 and unders on Dahlia Street in Corona Del Mar on May 31st. It's footnoted, but it would be nice to include it in the math as well. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this subject? Okay, seeing no one, I'll close public comments. Staff, do you want to respond to the questions that were raised?
Mr. Mayor and council members, if you don't mind, I may do the things we've done in the past where I'll ask Mr. Markman a question. Jim, one of the first questions was by Ed, does this ordinance the development agreement supersede or bypass the ordinance itself, and is that a sensible thing to do, to adopt a development agreement that, as Ed put it, invalidates or goes against the ordinance?
Well, we have an ordinance that specifies a particular use permit procedure, and they have applied, and we've litigated with them, and I'm here to recommend this process, and the process, in my view, is best accomplished through a development agreement. And I should make a point. If a use permit is issued, it's an entitlement that runs with the land and follows new owners and other owners of the land the same way the development agreement does. They're both entitlement implementers, if you want to look at it that way. The development agreement, under the development agreement law, would supersede the need for the use permit because essentially all the terms have been negotiated, assuming that they are in the end acceptable to the city council, which would adopt them by ordinance. So they're compatible, but yes, there is, in essence, the development agreement would supersede the processing of the use permit. You cannot supersede to the extent that you would permit a use that otherwise could not ever be permitted in the zone. But obviously we're not doing that here because we're dealing with the uses under the development agreement, which would be the same uses we'd be dealing with under the use permit. So it's a method that allows you to deal with unusual situations, and essentially a lot of people refer to development agreements as contract zoning. It's a way to negotiate results. In this case, and this can't be said enough, regardless of how many people want to get up and talk about the solution of this problem or that problem, here we have the largest operator in Newport Beach, now operating, I believe, something like 20 out of the 23 licensed 6 or under facilities in town, which are not subject to our regulation under state law, agreeing to put a cap on all their operation, which includes those 6 or under licensed. Now, I might as well deal with the integral facility definition as well. We have written an ordinance that I would be happy to defend in the next case, should there be another case that involves an integral operator. And it is true, if we settle this case and it's dismissed, then there won't be an injunction sitting out there. All that was meant to be said in the press release was that at present it is clear that Judge Selna issued a very limited injunction, but what it did was it precluded us from applying the integral facility or integral use definitions in a way which would essentially interfere with the issuing of those 6 or under licenses by ADP. And so he told us we couldn't fuss with that or change it through a zoning process. My view of his arguing the matter in front of him was that he's telling us if you don't like what ADP is doing in their licensing and you think there are integral uses that don't meet the intent of the law, then go sue ADP or take it up with them. But he's not going to let you do it the way we attempted to do it. Now, again, it's true. If this case goes away through the settlement, then there's no outstanding court order, and certainly there's no reported opinion that deals anymore with the integral facilities. And would we take that up on appeal and process it all the way through the court system if the council allowed? Yes. Yeah, we believe in those definitions, but Judge Selna didn't agree.
Jim, just a quick follow-up there. There is another lawsuit against the city, is there not? And does that lawsuit not allege the same issues regarding integral facilities? And if so, and that lawsuit continues, would we still have an opportunity to argue the effectiveness of the integral facilities language in that lawsuit?
I don't think so, because the lawsuit filed by Pacific Shores, which by the way, we've moved to dismiss their attack on the ordinance. They're not going to get to the integral use or integral facility issue because they don't operate any 6 or under facility. They operate 3 facilities that are much larger than that. So they're not entitled to the exemption in the first place, and I don't believe the judge will hear an abstract argument on that if they present it. So
they're also unlicensed.
They're also unlicensed. So the only people in town who could have raised that issue are people with licensed 6 or unders, principally sober living by the city. So again, let me say this is such an important concession. You know, this is an agreement. There's an operator that wants to continue an operation in town. They're willing to scale down their operation on a permanent basis, regardless of what the economy does, and to do so in a way which closes the door on what is now a wide open hole through anybody's attempt to regulate these uses by agreeing all of their bed limits will include 6 or under license. They could put 6 or under, otherwise they could put 6 or under license, anybody could, all over this town and operate them whether integrally or not, and we know where we stand in the federal case now if we're given that circumstance. So that is definitely a motivating factor for me to recommend this to the council and the community.
That gets directly to a point that Mr. Nichols raised. I'm trying to quote him here. Any home can have an ADP home beside it as a result of arguably this development agreement. I think the point, as you stated, is that that's true under current law. What we have done through the development agreement is work with sober living to agree that it will not be a sober living by the C home next to them. We have no protection on any other operator because of what the judge did with that ordinance.
Well, let's look at this 2 ways. First, today with our ordinance, other than 6 or under license by ADP, nobody can set up one of these homes next door to you unless they receive a use permit. No new ones.
If it's larger than 6 license. Yeah.
Or if it's 6 or under unlicensed. So no one could do that. But also, on the other hand, any small operator or large operator could get an ADP license for 6 or less and open up next to anybody, and that's going to be the case before or after this agreement is entered into, except, again, sober living has capped its ability to do that, to drive through that hole in the regulations that have been put there by the state legislature. And I haven't heard of anybody doing that anywhere to date.
Okay, next, Jim, Mr. Weldon brought up a couple of issues that arguably were within the context of mediation about 162 beds and contributions to a park. If we have any comments on that.
I can take it in reverse order. There were some discussions about people seeking money through the mediation process. I'm not going to say who sought what, but one of the concepts was that sober living was to pay anything. It would be to pay into the city for some beautification in the impacted area that people have been talking about. None of that was agreed to. None of that's part of this.
Mr. Weldon also raised the issue of how does this apply to the city's fire codes?
Well, at the present agreement, essentially, with the application of the fire code is that the present operations that have been allowed to open and operate under an application of the fire code will be left exactly where they are. Nobody's going to be treated any differently, and their relocation sites will be treated the same way because we're forcing them to relocate. And actually, we've negotiated for the disbursement. So our view of it is all the people who occupy those beds are essentially put in exactly the same fire code position or fire safety position that they have been all these years. No change. Anybody who comes in new for a CUP for a new facility will have applied to it the then current or now current building and fire codes.
Ms. Oberman noted something you touched on a little bit, but about how making sure that this development agreement covers subsidiaries. She used the term managed by exception, which I took to be that concern about other entities besides sober living within CRC Health managing facilities. Does this cover them?
Well, that's a very, whatever Denise was referring to is part of this agreement that we're still wrestling with, and we're still going to be talking to Sober Living's attorney, Dick Terzian's in the audience. The question is this: how broadly do you want this to apply? Because on the one hand, it's an entitlement. And I think that Denise was talking about the entitlement. On the other hand, it's a cap and a restriction. So we're wrestling with the idea of how broadly would we like to have this apply? Would we like CRC, the parent company, Sober Living, and its subsidiaries to both have the entitlement but also be capped so that a subsidiary can't move in the community and essentially defeat the purpose of the agreement? So that we haven't talked or decided exactly how we're going to handle that. I'm pretty much for the widest application possible, because I believe this agreement is very, very beneficial to the city. And the more companies that are essentially brought together under the one cap and all of these restrictions, the better off the city is. I don't know how Sober Living is going to feel about it. They may feel the same way because these companies also will have the entitlement. So that's a very interesting negotiating issue that's still alive.
And finally, you addressed an issue that Ms. Coran raised about does the preliminary injunction go away? I think you already answered that. The rest,
well, if the case goes away, there's not going to be any outstanding order against us. And as I said, the second case that's now pending, the only other case pending that we're dealing with, that operator does not have any 6 or under licenses. So the integral use, integral facility definition won't apply in that case. So we don't have a pending case that's challenging the ordinance should this settlement become effective. That's challenging the integral use.
I had one that I think early on that you missed.
Okay.
Can they be legally, how would this development agreement be legally transferred to somebody else? I think somebody brought that up.
Yes, it will be applicable to any successor in interest, but the way I've written the language, not yet reviewed again by Sober Living, is that they can't transfer parts of it. That because we're talking about a citywide regulation and bed limit and restriction, any successor would have to take all of the operation with them. So it is transferable. Both the entitlement and the restrictions go hand in glove as a whole, not as a bunch of parts that can be carved up. Because you can't, once you carve it up, you can't administer it anymore. So the questions that's going to come before the council is what's the final outcome of these discussions on how transferable this should be or how broadly it should apply. From my point of view, I'll say again, the broader the better, because I think this is a very, very favorable result for the city.
But I'd have to say, speaking from the standpoint of council, or city council, this whole issue of transferability and assignability and so forth still needs plenty of discussion and illumination amongst us before we understand exactly how we want to treat it in the agreement. So,
correct. Mr. Mayor, those are all the questions that I wrote down.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Kiff. Does any member of the council have any comments or questions?
I had a couple other items that I circled here that I thought were raised that may not have been answered. Mr. Nichols commented that he's concerned that the development agreement, he didn't say necessarily, but I think that's probably what he's implying, sets a precedent for other operators. And have you thought about this? So I guess what I think we need is an answer to is, does this agreement set a precedent that the city is anyway bound by as it relates to other operators?
The city isn't bound by this. I would say this because obviously we're recommending this to the city and to the citizens. We think it's an excellent template that if other operators who have multiple operations and are applying for multiple use permits would approach the city to try to accomplish something like this, I personally would encourage those negotiations. Is it a precedent? No. A development agreement is always applicable to a unique set of facts, so it's not like a court case. I don't think the council would be bound to do the same thing if circumstances are different. And here they're always different. But again, as a template, if somebody wants to come in and limit themselves in a way that's beneficial to the community in a significant way, I'm sure we would talk to them. Otherwise, they can go through the use permit process.
Okay, I think that answer also applied to a question raised by Laura Curran regarding the sober living development agreement being used by others. In addition to that, Denise Overman raised the question of the tot lot standard and the fact that, in her view, case law can substantiate an exclusion or a similar exclusion for many types of situations, including all schools, bars, parks, etc. So would you please address that question?
Yeah, well, I'll reiterate this. I guess this has come up, and I have respectful disagreement with Denise and the attorneys who represent her on that. I've found almost every case I've read with a disbursement standard of any nature has been held to be fatally discriminatory on its face. And so I don't think the case law does support that approach, or a hard approach in an ordinance with a disbursement standard, even from one of these uses away from another one. So I haven't read a new case that changed my mind.
And I suppose that response would also apply to Ms. Curran's question regarding the one facility per block definition being too vague, and we should simply resort to a 1,000-foot definition. Now, in the context of the settlement agreement, I suppose we do have more flexibility than under law and the ordinance. But if you can respond to that.
Well, I think we all know she's made a good point, because blocks are short or long in Newport Beach depending on where you are. So on the other hand, the definition of block here, when we looked at actually Dave looked at all the physical locations, seems to work well as far as dispersing. We don't have, for example, a block with 3 houses on it, and there's one of these recovery homes, and then right across the street is another block with 3 homes. So there's another recovery home, so there's 2 of them sitting right there within 50 feet of each other. We don't have that circumstance. I think the point she made abstractly is a very good point, and with that, we thought about it when we wrote the ordinance, and we gave that guidance to the hearing officer. We dealt on the basis of the average length of blocks in Newport Beach. But here, because it's a specific agreement and because we actually looked at the results physically, it works.
And lastly, Ms. Overman raised the point about the one facility block per block standard is still too concentrated in your view, and that we could wind up with one facility every 300 feet.
Well, again, remember, we're talking about why you can't end up with one facility every 300 feet is because there's a bed limit. And so there's only a certain number of facilities that can remain open, particularly in the impacted area. And we know 12 of those beds are going to be on Lido Island, 144 are going to be on the peninsula or in the affected area, and 10 or so may be dispersed. So there's a limit. Again, speaking only of sober living by the sea, this limit of bed count limit is the restricting factor as to how many total can land in that area. 144. That's the end of them. If it's one building that has 12 in it, so you're talking about 10 to 12 buildings in that whole area that will remain operating if they maintain their present business model. So I don't think that's the case. If it was an unlimited number of beds, she'd have a good point.
All right, and then the same question was raised in a different context by both Ms. Overman and Mr. Weldon about inaccuracies in the city's, the information the city has distributed either through its press release or on the website. And Dave, I think this is one for you. Are you aware of any inaccuracies? What's your view of correcting inaccuracies to the extent that they're identified?
I'm always happy to look at somebody's information if they believe something that I have placed on the website or any of my numbers are inaccurate. The vetting process for this has been extensive, as the council knows, and we've gone through since probably since roughly more than a year ago, allegations of a home here or a home there, or and things like that, and I think we've vetted those homes exhaustively, more than any other entity has done or should be asked to do, and I'm very confident in our material. But again, very welcome to hear someone's information to the contrary.
But I think the point of their question had to do with statements attributed that the city made attributed to concerned citizens or Mr. Weldon personally, and the accuracy thereof or the selectivity by which they were used.
Well, I certainly tried to be completely on the up and up, and I took Mr. Weldon's statements verbatim from the web stream that is the result of any council meeting. I did delete some comments because they weren't statements about that are directly relevant to this settlement agreement. I tried to pull out those statements where I thought Mr. Weldon specifically noted a request or a demand or an interest by CCNB. There wasn't any intent to pull out things that were critical to the city. I would have put those up too. They were specifically relating to demands asked by any operator, the kind of expectations that CCNB has expressed, concerned citizens has expressed for a long time.
And if someone is able to show you where there is inaccuracies in anything the city has produced or put on the website, I presume you'd be perfectly willing to make the correction associated with it.
Very willing to do that, and I think we've made that request. If point out to me specifically where you think there's inaccuracies, and I'm happy to review it and then change it.
Okay. Any other comments from council? Any final words, Mr. Markman?
No, it's we're drafting now, and there are a lot of issues that as you start drafting this complex an agreement, the more issues pop up, and we're going to hope to have a draft through the city attorney's office and the council subcommittee this week that we can send off to Sober Living, and then we'll start negotiating with them on the language. I'm sure they'll think of things we haven't thought of, but again, I'm happy to be sitting here in the position to recommend this to you. Some of the things we've talked about, I think, are very unanticipated benefits that have been generated by the process of doing the ordinance, litigating, and then mediating. And hopefully the council will see it the same way when you conclude your process.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion to receive and file the report.
I'd like to make one more comment, Mr.
Sure.
Mayor.
Go ahead, Mr. Hunt.
There's been a couple of comments also along the way about the fact that we need to know all the facts about this development agreement, and that the citizens need to have the ability to review all the facts and participate in consideration of it. And I just want to, although it's been said, I think it's worth saying again, there will be multiple opportunities for that to happen. This settlement agreement and the development agreement associated with it will not be finalized and enacted until it's gone through at least one planning commission public hearing and at least 2 city council meetings that are available to the public. And the entire agreement, all aspects of it, is my understanding, will be made public prior to those meetings. And therefore, there will be an opportunity to express views about how those agreements might be changed or what might be wrong with them. Is that correct, Jim?
That is correct.
Okay, motion to receive and file, please.
Second.
Please vote.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to the normal sequence of our agenda, which is oral reports from City Council on committee activities. Councilwoman Gardner?
Yes, we had the second meeting of the Green Task Force, and I'm convinced that we're moving so rapidly that by the end of summer we will have something to bring before the council in terms of a proposal for actual green building ideas and perhaps an ordinance, and also for an extensive education program, which will be taking advantage of the city's website as well as racks for brochures and then multiple other ideas. So we're really going great guns, or maybe I should say green guns.
Councilman Curry?
No items.
Councilman Henn?
I have nothing.
Councilman Rosansky?
Nothing, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Daigle?
Yes, Mayor Solich, a couple of reports. We heard this evening a little bit about our website. Serve on the Media and Communications Committee with Councilmember Gardner and Councilmember Curry, 2 council members that regularly publish newsletters. I know that's really appreciated by the community. And during the past year, we've been trying to drive traffic onto our website. And since May, we started keeping score. We got 3,500 hits a day, and now in July we're up to 9,000 hits a day. So our focused effort to get you on the city website is panning out. 10,000, here we come. And so in terms of why you might want to get on our website, first of all, convenience. You can save yourself a trip to City Hall. You can pay your bills online. You can register for classes online, schedule an inspection, appeal a traffic ticket, apply for a job, file a complaint. And secondly, in terms of community, our recent concert at Bob Henry Park drew the most participants ever, the most audience. And then on August 2nd, we're going to have Shakespeare by the Sea. So we're promoting our community events. Additionally, information, earlier this evening we had a discussion on group residential uses, group residential homes. And if you go on the homepage of our website, there's an icon on that issue, and it unfolds into many of the materials that were referenced here this evening. And then finally, recognizing that communication is a two-way street, you can also sign up for electronic alerts, and we will communicate to you via email or telephone or fax what the various activities of the city. So we hope that you visit our website, and we take our duty to inform the public very seriously, and we're always open to suggestions. And then the second committee that met was the Citizens Aviation Committee, and our city manager has coordinated a study that looked at current departure operations at John Wayne Airport. And the biggest change in aviation today, or one of the biggest changes, is in the navigational platforms. And in the past, we've been using, or they've been using ground-based navigation, and they're now transitioning to satellite, which creates a more precise and narrow flight path. And so there would be less dispersion in terms of flights over our community. And the whole reason for commissioning the study was to look at these procedures and specifically any impacts on our community. And so the consultant made a couple of recommendations, and that was if we wanted to look at procedures, how we would do that. Specifically, we've had complaints about planes taking a left turn before they clear the coast and go over Corona Del Mar. And so in those particular issues, what our consultant advised is, of course, first of all, take stock of our position, and that is we don't own the airport, and we don't have land use control over the airport. It's a county-owned facility subject to FAA constraints, and so for the city as a local community to advance any of our issues, the recommendation was for us to coordinate closely with the airport. And then later in the day, the mayor, the city manager, and myself met with our community groups, and one of the things that we've really been focusing on this year is to strengthen relations with our community groups, and I think that they've been pleased with our ongoing outreach to them. So those would be some of the committee work that's we've been working on in the past few weeks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have no reports. Madam Clerk.
Public comments. Public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes. Before speaking, please state your name for the record.
Good evening, Mayor Selich and the other members of the City Council. My name is Gary Sokolich, and I'm not related to the mayor. I reside at 801 Kings Road, Newport Beach, 92663. Because of the 3-minute time constraint, I'm going to read a prepared manuscript that I've given to the city clerk for distribution and inclusion in the documented record of this meeting. I've lived at 801 Kings Road for 20 years. During that entire time, I've had an 18-foot Soulcat catamaran on a trailer parked in the western half of my driveway. On May 28, 2008, I received a notice of violation that was issued by Code Enforcement Officer Brian Contino. I subsequently spoke with Mr. Contino by phone, at which time he told me that my boat was in violation because the distance between the property line and my garage was less than the required 19-foot setback. Mr. Contino also stated that if I parked my car in my driveway next to my boat would be in violation, but my car would not. In order to clear up my confusion about the car versus boat issue, I read section 20.66.040 of the municipal code, and I spoke with Mr. Alford in the planning department. Mr. Alford is the city's resident expert on Title 20. As a result, I learned the purpose of the 19-foot setback requirement is to prevent cars that are parked in driveways from blocking the public right-of-way on sidewalks. I also learned that because there are no sidewalks on the south side of Kings Road, the 19-foot setback requirement is not directly applicable. More importantly, I learned that section 20.66.040 applies to motor vehicles, i.e. cars, trucks, and SUVs, as well as to trailers and watercraft, and that Mr. Contino's assertion that it applies to my boat but not to my car was a lie. The notice of violation that I received exposes two serious problems. One problem has to do with the relevance and applicability of the 19-foot setback requirement to driveways where there are no sidewalks. The other problem has to do with the enforcement of 20.66.040 in a fair and non-discriminatory manner to cars, trucks, and SUVs, as well as to trailers and watercraft. The latter problem is a real can of worms, because there are numerous residents along Kings Road and the Cliff Haven community who are parking their cars, trucks, and SUVs in driveways that are just like mine. To date, all attempts on my part to get the people in code enforcement, the city manager, and the city attorney to even acknowledge the existence of these issues, let alone address them, have failed. While the people in code enforcement and the city attorney have simply ignored my requests for clarification of these issues, the city manager has been quite free in expressing his opinions. In his most recent and most disturbing email, the city manager stated, "I intend to go down that road of bringing you into compliance with city regulations. You can kick and scream all you want, but you are going to be cited repeatedly until you come into compliance." The city manager will soon come to realize that he is not my father and that I'm not a 5-year-old child throwing a temper tantrum. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rudolph, can you and the code enforcement people get together with Mr. Sokolich? And
yes, but Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a statement. And,
okay.
Mr. Sokolich did refer to section 20.66.040, but it's our opinion, code enforcement in mind, that he misinterpreted that. Let me read section A4 for you. It talks about access. Each parking space shall be capable of being reached directly from an adjoining vehicular right-of-way or over an improved hard surface driveway. Such driveway shall be maintained free and clear at all times except for the parking of currently registered licensed motor vehicles and for temporary obstructions which are incidental to the use of the property. This catamaran is not a licensed motor vehicle, and Mr. Sokolich has been told that repeatedly. He has been given 2 time extensions. We have had numerous emails, and that was the purpose for me making the statement that I made.
And I also need to add that I did respond to Mr. Sokolich's questions, and my response was that if he felt that he was in compliance with the code or he did have an issue with the code, he should appeal the precision, the citation as is provided in the code. So he does have recourse.
And one last statement, and there was a complaint in his neighborhood about the parking of his catamaran, which is why code enforcement followed up on this issue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Sure, hand to the city manager.
Yeah, the photos are pretty good. Hello again. We're Steve and Karen Taransky, and we live in West Newport. We've been dealing with an overwhelming and unsanitary amounts of trash piled up to 6 feet high next to the entry to our house. After trying to resolve this with the owners for years, we started providing documentation to city officials about 2 years ago. The owners received multiple citations, but the problem still persists. Several other properties this group owns have been issued multiple citations as well. So it's not an isolated incident, and we are not the only victims. While many of their properties are non-compliant, we feel that we've been bearing the brunt of their actions. They stack their trash right next to our walkway leading to our front doors. At times we've had as many as 17 trash barrels, 15 bikes, or 9 barbecue grills on or over our property line. We had to build a wall to keep the trash off of our property, but it's just a Band-Aid. They stack the trash so high that it routinely falls over the wall. The trash problem is compounded by the fact that they're using the property at 4000 Seashore as a staging area for trash and junk from their other buildings. They have approximately 10 summer rental buildings. They currently have 13 trash barrels, but are generating enough trash to fill 20 or 25 trash barrels. So obviously, most of the trash is not contained by the barrels. We have a serious fly and odor problem, and often we can't open the doors or windows due to the stench. This is a serious health hazard to the community. The week of July 4th, the occupancy of the building seemed to range from 20 to 40 younger people. The party went on night and day throughout the week, and the whole neighborhood was irate. Police action was required often during the week, and the mayhem escalated on the 3rd and 4th. Mountains of trash were generated during the week-long binge. When we asked the owner to get the trash off of our property, he got belligerent with us, cussed at my wife, told us we hadn't asked him nicely enough. Prior to that week, their winter season renters had 2 dogs that crapped on the concrete front porch for 8 months. Their disposal consisted of the tenants hosing the dog stuff into the mulch adjacent to the concrete. During the transition from winter to summer, I mentioned the dog crap to the owner. He shrugged and said there's only so much he can do. Within a few hours, the first summer rent family arrived with 3 small children. The children were playing in that mulch for several days, but we didn't say anything because we didn't want to risk retaliation from this family of owners. The next family also had children playing in the mulch. These owners do not care how adversely they affect the community or the neighbors. They are not properly managing their properties to standards expected by the community. They're creating and or allowing health and safety hazards. They routinely push the limits of what they can get away with. Multiple citations have only produced temporary results. We thank you for the assistance we've gotten already in attempts to keep them in order, and your continued assistance in resolving this situation would be greatly appreciated. We have provided some suggestions in the handout. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bluedowd, do you have some comments that you wanted to make?
I did. Yesterday, I got copies of the pictures that were taken, I think, over the 4th of July and the weekend, and they certainly got my attention about it being a very difficult situation and one that we want to jump on and help clean up. So I think they have my attention and code enforcement's attention, and we're going to be with the city attorney and see what actions we can take to strengthen our hand in enforcement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Hen, you had a comment?
Yeah, Dave, you're responsible for code enforcement. Is it your view that there have been other sorts of violations from these landlords over the years that are similar to this?
Yes, indeed.
So this is not an isolated incident by any means with regard to the landlord.
That's right.
It's been going on for 6 years, and only in the last 2 years we've brought the city into it. We tried to work with it for years, and it just it's an untenable situation.
Mr. and Mrs. Taransky, as far as I know, yesterday was or Sunday, I guess, your email was sent, was the first time that you've sent it directly to me, but I am very interested in solving this problem on your behalf, on behalf of other residents that suffer similar problems, and I know that Homer and Dave and Robin will work hard to make this happen. I'm sorry it hasn't happened yet, but that doesn't mean it won't.
Okay.
I think it would also be nice if we got a report back to council on the outcome so that we know that things are working.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll closed public comments. We'll go on to the next item, item number 12, continued business. Cost recovery ordinance, Chapter 3.36, fee resolution and master fee schedule.
Mr. Mayor, this is the second reading of the ordinance, given the changes that were made at the last meeting when the council discussed the item, and also it would be the reading for the resolution then. Glenn, do you have anything to say on any changes or to highlight any information?
Mayor and council members, as Homer relates, we have applied the recommended changes to the ordinance and the fee schedule and the resolution, and that's what we're proposing be adopted this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the changes that were made since the last council review of this item and since the introduction of the ordinance, or any other element of the report.
Okay, any questions, Mr. Everode?
We have a modification. I'm reminded that we have one of the 850 fees, one related to planning. We have identified that in the fee schedule should be subject to phasing, and it doesn't meet the criteria that council had previously needed to be established for phasing in of fees, because it doesn't meet the criteria of being over $100 or 100% increase in the charge. So I'm proposing that on the modification permit fee item in the master fee schedule, that we're going to not apply phasing to that particular item, so we would remove the P from that designation in the fee schedule. We can bring that back to council, the schedule, if you like. The resolution will not be effective until the effective date of the ordinance. We're introducing that ordinance last council meeting, adopting it this council meeting, so if council desires, we can bring that change in the mod permit fee on the fee schedule back with the resolution, or make the change.
Mayor, may I ask?
Yeah, go ahead,
May I ask
Ms.
a
Hawson.
question and maybe come up with a resolution? I think is that something that needs to be done, that can't be done here tonight with just direction to change the resolution?
With the direction, we're happy to make that change, indeed.
I think it could be if the council wanted to go ahead and make the recommendation on the resolution of the phasing for that particular, if the council want to approve the resolution with that amendment. The other issue I wanted to clarify in section 2 of the resolution, Glenn, it says that the development fees shall take effect, adopted by the resolution shall take effect 30 days following the effective date of the ordinance. And I don't think you intended that. You intended it to be on the effective date of the ordinance.
Actually,
this would be 30 days after the 30 days.
Right. The ordinance becomes effective 30 days after tonight if it's adopted.
Correct.
And development fees are subject to a 60-day period after the adoption. So everything but the development fees would be lawfully applied 30 days from this evening. Development fees are 60 days.
Oh, I see the clarification. Okay.
Okay, so the proper action tonight then, if we wanted to include the change in the resolution for the modification permits, would be to adopt the ordinance and then continue the resolution to the next meeting?
Well, our preference would be just to make the change to the resolution tonight and not continue.
I thought you said we couldn't make it tonight.
No, you could.
Oh, you said you could.
You
Okay.
could to the resolution. That's
Okay.
what I was saying. You
Okay.
couldn't make a change to
Misunderstood
the
you.
ordinance. But
And just to clarify, then that means there won't be any delay in the effectiveness of the ordinance.
no, there won't be any delay in the effectiveness of the ordinance, and you won't have to come back and reconsider the resolution in another meeting.
Okay. So I move the item.
I
with
second
the
it.
change that is proposed by staff.
Okay, well, I think Councilman Curry has requested that we bifurcate the motion into two motions. So I would, first of all, let's see if there's any public comment. Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. So could we do a motion on the ordinance separate from the resolution?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, please vote. It's on the ordinance.
Motion carries.
Okay, and then a second motion on the resolution as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, please vote.
With Councilmember Curry voting no, the motion carries.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
Motion for reconsideration. A motion to reconsider the vote on any action taken by the City Council at either this meeting or the previous meeting may be made only by one of the council members who voted with the prevailing side.
Okay, any motions for reconsideration? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to adjourn our meeting this evening in the memory of Phil Arst, passed away last week. I'm going to read a few comments from the Daily Pilot that Phil was a major political figure and activist in Newport Beach for many years. He was 79 years old. He was determined. He didn't want to give up on his small beach town, staying in small beach town, even if it did get a little bigger and more popular. So he fought for his beliefs through sickness and health, and he made a name for himself in doing so. I can speak for myself that in the dealings I had with Phil, he was always polite and always a gentleman. He had his vision of Newport Beach that he fought passionately for, and I agreed with him on some things and disagreed with him on others, but he was always a gentleman, and I appreciated the diligence that he put into his efforts in representing his beliefs. So we send our condolences to his family. With that, we're adjourned.